They fired him in front of the entire restaurant staff, told everyone he'd never amount to anything in this industry, and sent him out the back door with a garbage bag of his belongings. 15 years later, Waverly Sinclair watched that same man walk into the gala she was catering, wearing a chef's jacket with 3 Michelin stars on his sleeve and his name above the door of every fine dining room in the country. But before any of that, before the gala, before the jacket, before everything that was about to happen, Waverly needed to figure out why the walk-in freezer was playing mind games with her on the most important catering job of the year. She stood in front of it with both hands on her hips. "Listen," she said very calmly to the freezer door. "I have 40 portions of seared duck breast in there. 40, I need you to open. That's all I'm asking. One job." The handle, which had been jamming since Tuesday, did not cooperate. Waverly tried again. She pulled, she jiggled. She gave it a very firm look that she usually reserved for unreasonable suppliers and sous chefs who showed up 10 minutes late claiming traffic. Nothing. "You know what," she said, stepping back. "I don't even need to understand you. I just need you to function for the next 4 hours, and then you can do whatever you want. Freeze over, retire, become a wardrobe, I don't care." She heard a low sound behind her, not the freezer, a laugh, the kind that was trying very hard not to be a laugh and failing entirely. Waverly turned around. The man standing in the service corridor was tall in a way that made the ceiling feel lower. Dark jacket, sleeves pushed up, carrying a clipboard in a way that suggested the clipboard was an afterthought rather than a reason to be there. He was looking at her with an expression that landed somewhere between amused and trying to be polite about being amused. "The trick is to lift while you pull," he said. "The hinge is warped. Has been for about 2 years, according to the facilities manager." Waverly stared at him. "You work here?" "Not exactly." He walked over, set the clipboard on the nearest shelf, gripped the handle, lifted slightly, pulled. The door opened with a sound like a small apology. Waverly looked at the open freezer, looked at him, looked back at the freezer. "I had a whole speech prepared," she said. "I heard part of it. The wardrobe retirement plan was ambitious. It was a real offer." She reached past him to grab the first tray of duck. Waverly Sinclair. "I'm catering this evening." "I know," he said. "I'm Camden. I'm here for the event." She looked at him again, something about the way he said it. "Not I'm attending the event, I'm here for the event," like the event was his. But she had 40 portions of duck breast and 45 minutes, so she let it go. "Well, Camden," she said, balancing the tray. "Thank you for the freezer diplomacy. If you ever need a reference for mechanical door negotiations, I'm your person," he smiled. It was a quiet smile, the kind that happened in the eyes before it reached the mouth. "I'll keep that in mind," he said, and he was gone. Waverly's sous chef, a 23-year-old named Bex, who had strong opinions about everything and no internal filter whatsoever, appeared at her elbow exactly 3 seconds later. Who was that? A man who knows about freezer hinges. He was extremely good-looking for someone who knows about freezer hinges. "Focus," Waverly said. "Sauces." Bex went back to the sauces, but not without a look over her shoulder that said this conversation was not finished, merely deferred. The Whitfield Gala was the kind of event that Waverly had spent 7 years building toward. The Whitfield Foundation hosted it every year, raising funds for culinary arts scholarships across the country. It was attended by every significant name in Canadian hospitality, every food critic whose review could make or ruin a restaurant, and a particular rotation of chefs who had turned cooking into something that looked closer to art than sustenance. Getting the catering contract had taken Waverly 18 months of proposals, references, tastings, and one very tense meeting with the Foundation's events coordinator, where she'd accidentally spilled a glass of sparkling water and spent the remaining 20 minutes trying to appear as though she hadn't noticed. She'd gotten the contract anyway. She told herself it was the duck breast. The evening began the way these evenings always did. The first guests arriving with the studied casualness of people who'd been deciding what to wear for 3 days. The servers moved in the patterns Waverly had drilled into them. The appetizers went out on time. The kitchen, which was not her kitchen and therefore slightly hostile, was operating at a temperature that could charitably be described as an adventure. She was tasting a sauce that needed exactly 1 more minute when she heard the announcement. The Foundation's director, a woman named Iris Calloway who wore her authority like a very good coat, stepped to the podium. "Good evening. Tonight's gala marks a special occasion for the Whitfield Foundation. 15 years ago, we lost one of our most promising scholarship candidates, not because of lack of talent, but because of circumstances that none of us handled as well as we should have." A pause. We are proud that Camden Ashworth has agreed to not only return this evening but to partner with the foundation going forward on the next generation of culinary scholarships." Waverly went still. She looked out toward the main hall, the same man, same quiet presence, but now in a chef's jacket that was unmistakably not borrowed, with a name embroidered above the pocket and 3 small stars beside it. Camden Ashworth. She knew that name. Everyone in the industry knew that name. She just hadn't known the face that went with it until 45 minutes ago when he was helping her negotiate with a broken freezer door. Bex appeared beside her again. "Okay," Bex said, her voice very low and very urgent. "I need you to know that I just looked him up and I would like to formally request a moment. Not now. Waverly. 3 Michelin stars. He owns Ashworth House in Vancouver, Camden's Table in Toronto, and that new place in Montreal that has a 14-month waiting list. I know. You knew. I know now. Keep moving." The first course went out without incident. The second course had a brief philosophical disagreement between Waverly and the rental kitchen's induction burners, which she won through sheer stubbornness. By the time the main course was plated and moving, Waverly had almost entirely stopped thinking about Camden Ashworth. Almost. She was checking a plate near the pass when she felt someone standing beside her, not Bex. The energy was different. She looked up. "The duck is extraordinary," Camden said. He wasn't performing a compliment. He said it the way people in their industry said things they meant, with the specific plainness that meant they'd tasted it carefully and arrived at a conclusion. Waverly felt warmth rise in her face and resolutely ignored it. "The hinge on the freezer is what made it possible," she said. He almost smiled. "I'll tell facilities. Can I ask you something?" "You can. You said you were here for the event. You didn't say you were the reason for the event." Camden looked at his hands. He'd set down whatever he'd been holding and his hands were empty in the way hands sometimes look when a person doesn't quite know what to do with them. It felt like a lot of context to drop on someone who was trying to open a freezer door, he said. "Fair," Waverly admitted. They stood for a moment in the particular way that 2 people stand when the conversation could go 3 different directions and neither of them is sure which one to take. "The Foundation's scholarship," Waverly said carefully. "Iris said you were a candidate once." Something shifted in his face. Not much. Just the small, almost invisible tightening that happened when a subject had weight to it. "A long time ago," he said. "I was 22, accepted even, and then." He stopped. Waverly waited. She had learned a long time ago that some sentences needed a long runway. Someone decided I hadn't earned it. That a kid from a fishing town in Nova Scotia who learned to cook in his grandmother's kitchen didn't belong at a foundation table. A pause. "The decision came from above me. I didn't have the standing to argue it. What happened? I found another way. It took longer. It was harder. But I cooked." He shrugged, and the shrug was too controlled to be casual. "And then I kept cooking." Waverly was quiet for a moment. "Who made that decision?" "About the scholarship." He looked at her and there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read. Not anger. Older than anger. "His name is Dunmore," Camden said. "Gerald Dunmore. He was on the selection board. He's still on the selection board. In fact, he's sitting at table 7 right now." The kitchen was a useful place to be after a conversation like that because kitchens required attention, and attention left no space for the particular feeling Waverly was carrying now, which was something between indignation on behalf of a person she'd just met and a strange, helpless sense of recognition. She knew what it was to be told, in official language with official signatures, that you did not belong somewhere you'd spent your whole life trying to get to. She'd been 24 when a senior chef at the restaurant, where she'd done her externship, told her she had good instincts for a catering kind of cook, in exactly the tone that meant he didn't think catering was a real kind of cooking. She'd been so blindsided by the casual cruelty of it that she'd said nothing. She'd gone home and cried in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons, which she'd told nobody, not even Bex. She focused on the dessert course. She did not look toward table 7. The dessert was a maple creme brulee with a thin hazelnut tulle that Waverly had practiced 37 times in the preceding 2 weeks. She was quietly proud of it in the way you could only be proud of something that had cost you actual sleep. The first plates went out, and then she heard it. A voice from the main hall, carrying in that way voices did in rooms with high ceilings and not quite enough ambient noise to absorb them. "Well, I have to say," the voice announced, with the confidence of a man who had never once in his life wondered if he was talking too loud. "It's a perfectly adequate meal. Very competent for a smaller operation." Waverly picked up a tool and set it down very carefully. "Gerald," a woman's voice said quietly. "I'm simply saying what everyone's thinking, Margot." The voice again. Carrying further now. "The duck was acceptable, But you can tell it's not a chef's kitchen producing it. There's no real vision. Waverly became aware that the kitchen had gone very quiet. Bex was looking at her. The servers were looking at each other. She put the tuile down. "Bex," she said, "plates." She walked to the pass and looked out. Table 7 was about 30 feet away. She could see a man in his mid-60s, heavy-set, the kind of tan that came from golf rather than weather, leaning back in his chair with a particular ease that belonged to someone who had never had occasion to shrink. And standing, quite still, near the entrance to the hall was Camden. He hadn't moved toward table 7. He was just standing, watching, with an expression that was too composed to be comfortable. One of the servers, a very young one named Mathieu, who had only worked 3 of Waverly's events and was still very earnest about everything, came back through the pass. His face was pink. "He said the brulee was nice enough for a hotel buffet," Mathieu said. "I'm sorry, I didn't know how to respond." Waverly looked at Mathieu. She looked at the tuile in her hand. She looked out toward table 7. "It's all right," she said. "Mathieu, can you do something for me?" "Of course. Could you let Chef Ashworth know that I'd like to send a complimentary second dessert to table 7? A small gesture. Pair it with the late harvest Riesling we brought." Mathieu blinked. "Really?" "Even after he—" "Yes, and Mathieu? Make sure you mention to anyone nearby at the table that Chef Ashworth recommended the pairing personally." She watched Mathieu's face process this. Then he smiled. "I'll do that right now." Bex materialized beside her. "What are you doing, plating dessert?" Waverly said. She could not have said exactly why she did what she did next. Only that it felt right in the way that some things felt right before you had time to think them into something complicated. She plated 2 of the very best brulees she had, the ones with the most even caramelization, the cleanest tuile, the most precise quenelle of cream. She set them on the pass, and then she went out to the floor herself. She rarely did this. Her work was in the kitchen. But tonight she walked the plates to table 7, set one in front of Gerald Dunmore and one in front of the woman beside him, and said, in her most pleasant voice, "Compliments of the kitchen. We wanted to make sure you had the best version of the dessert." Gerald Dunmore looked up. He had small eyes and a firm chin and the look of a man not accustomed to receiving things without requesting them first. "Lovely," he said. "I hope you're enjoying the evening," Waverly said. "It's quite a special occasion, with Chef Ashworth being honored. He's someone who built something real without the support that should have been there for him at the start." She kept her voice perfectly neutral. Not aggressive, just factual. It's something to see, isn't it? What someone can become when they find their own way despite the obstacles. She smiled and excused herself. She was back through the kitchen door before she quite processed what she'd done. Her heart was going faster than it should have been. Bex stared at her. "Did you just— I have no idea what you're talking about," Waverly said. "How are we on coffee service?" The rest of the evening moved the way the ends of events always did. The particular exhaustion of people starting to feel the lateness, the speakers wrapping up, the tables beginning that gradual migration toward coats and conversations that would be finished in car parks. Waverly was overseeing the breakdown of her station when she heard someone behind her. "What you did at table 7. She turned. Camden was standing in the doorway between the service corridor and the kitchen. His jacket was different now. Still good, but the formal one had been replaced with something that looked like something he actually wore, rather than something he'd put on for an occasion. "I handled a complaint," Waverly said. "Standard service recovery. You mentioned me. I mentioned the evening's guest of honor. That's standard too." He was quiet for a moment, watching her in that way he had, the way that felt like he was reading something in the margins. "He was on the board," Camden said, "in 2009. When they reversed my scholarship acceptance." He paused. "I'd never told anyone that, actually, not publicly. I said it to you in a corridor because you asked, and I've been wondering why I did that ever since. Maybe you just needed to tell someone who wasn't invested in the outcome. Maybe." He leaned against the doorframe. "Or maybe I could tell you were someone who would understand what it costs." Waverly set down the tray she'd been stacking. "I lost a job once," she said. "A good one. Executive chef position at a hotel restaurant downtown. I'd been working toward it for 4 years." She paused. "The position went to someone whose last name happened to match the name on the building. The person who told me made it very clear, without saying it directly, that I simply wasn't quite the right fit for a room like that." "What did you do?" "I started my own company." She looked at her hands. "It took 3 years before I stopped being angry about it long enough to see that it was probably the better thing. 3 years is a long time to be angry. It was extremely efficient anger. I didn't waste any of it." Camden laughed. It was a fuller sound than she'd heard from him all evening. the kind that rearranged the atmosphere of a room slightly. "Can I ask you something now?" he said. "You can. Why did you come here tonight? To this gala specifically? You said you'd been pursuing this contract. It's the most significant event on the culinary calendar in this province. It's attended by the exact people I need to know, and I make something they'll remember eating. That's the whole plan." "That's a very honest answer. I find dishonesty wastes time I don't have." He was quiet for a moment. Outside in the main hall, she could hear the event winding down, the last conversations, the sounds of an evening concluding. "I'm opening a new place," Camden said, "smaller than the others. Here in Ottawa, actually. It's going to be different from what I've done before. More neighborhood, less spectacle." "That sounds like a departure." "It is." He paused. "I'd like to find a catering partner for the private events and the room rental side. Someone with a real sensibility about food, not just someone who can reproduce a menu without understanding it." He looked at her. "I'm going to give you my card. I'm going to ask you not to make any decision tonight. Think about it." Waverly held the card he offered. Clean design, just his name and a number. "I should tell you," she said, "that I will absolutely negotiate. I would expect nothing less," he said. And this time, the smile stayed. The next morning, Waverly was at her commercial kitchen space at 7:30, which was her normal time, though she would be the first to admit that 7:30 felt different the morning after a gala. She was going through the post-event notes. What had worked? What had been marginal? What the rental kitchen's induction burners had done that could not be explained by physics, when her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't have saved. "The freezer door at my new location opens correctly. Just thought you should know." Camden Ashworth. She stared at it for a moment. She typed back, "That's the lowest bar I've heard set for a commercial kitchen, but I appreciate the update." 3 seconds. "It's a high bar. You said it." Waverly set the phone face down on the counter and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she picked it back up. "Is there a time this week you'd be willing to show me the space?" His reply came in under a minute. "Thursday. 11. I'll send the address." Thursday at 11, the space was in the Glebe, in a building that had been a hardware store and then a wine bar and then, for 2 mysterious years, a place that sold only artisanal hot sauce. The bones of it were good. High ceilings, original brick on one wall, a kitchen footprint that had real potential. Camden was already there when she arrived. He showed her around with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had done many walkthroughs but had something particular on his mind for this one. "The kitchen's being redesigned," he said. "The front of house, I want it to feel like someone actually lives in it. What does that mean to you?" "Flowers that aren't arrangements, books that aren't decorative, music that doesn't announce itself." Waverly nodded. She understood that. She'd been in too many beautiful restaurants that felt like very expensive waiting rooms. "There's a local flower grower I use for my events," she said. "She grows things that look like someone just brought them in from a garden. No formal arrangements. Would that be what you're thinking?" Camden looked at her. "Yes, exactly that." They stood in the middle of the empty dining room, and she was aware of the particular quality of quiet in an unfinished space, the way it felt like possibility rather than absence. "Why Ottawa?" she asked. He looked around the room. "I grew up about 2 hours from here. My grandmother's house is still there. She's 91 and she still makes her own bread." A pause. "I've been everywhere. I wanted to be somewhere that felt like it could actually be home." Waverly looked at the brick wall, at the ceiling with its imperfect plaster, at the light coming through the south-facing windows. "That's a good reason," she said. "Waverly." She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized from the kitchen doorway the night of the gala, like someone who had decided to say something and was choosing the speed carefully. "I know this is a professional conversation," he said. "I'd like to have other kinds eventually, if that's something you'd want." Waverly considered this. She looked at the windows again, then at him. "I'd want that," she said. "But I need to tell you something first." "All right, I have a running disagreement with every automatic device in my life. Freezers, doors, GPS systems, the card reader at my regular parking spot. They're all against me. If you're going to spend time with me, you're going to witness these conflicts." He nodded slowly. "I fixed the freezer hinge once. Under ideal conditions. We'll see how you hold up." The smile this time came quickly, like he'd stopped trying to manage it. Over the weeks that followed, the space in the Glebe took shape. Waverly came by on Thursdays, which became a standing thing without either of them formally deciding it. She brought samples. She brought her own coffee, because Camden's espresso machine had opinions and she preferred not to negotiate with 2 difficult appliances on the same morning. The flower grower's name was Simone, and she was exactly the right person for the room. She arrived the first Thursday with armfuls of things in terracotta pots and left them in arrangements that looked like something that had grown that way on its own. Camden watched Simone's work from across the room and said nothing for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "That." Waverly made a small note in her book. The thing about Camden was that he was not easy to know quickly, but he was not trying to be difficult. He was simply someone who had learned to be careful with information about himself. And Waverly understood this, because she had learned the same thing and for similar reasons. What she learned, in pieces, over those Thursday mornings: he was the youngest of three, the only one who hadn't gone into fishing or forestry like his father and uncle. He'd taught himself to cook from his grandmother's handwritten recipe books, which were in a mixture of English and Cape Breton Gaelic, and contained measurements like a decent handful and enough. He'd worked in restaurants from 16 in every position that would have him, before getting to the point of the scholarship application that had been taken from him. "Did you ever confront him?" Waverly asked one Thursday. "Dunmore?" Camden poured 2 coffees and handed one to her. "No, I thought about it. Many times." He sat across from her at one of the new tables, which had just arrived and still smelled faintly of the workshop. "What would I have said? What would it have changed? Maybe nothing. But maybe you'd have felt different." "I felt different when I opened my first restaurant," he said. "More than anything Dunmore could have given me." "Do you think he knows who you became?" Camden was quiet for a moment. He was at the gala. He heard the announcement, so yes. He turned the cup in his hands. And what I kept thinking watching him at that table was that it wasn't enough. I'd built everything I have, and standing in the same room as him still made me 22 years old again for a minute. Still made me feel like I had to prove something. "And now?" He looked at her. "And then you walked over and said something in his direction that was so precisely placed that I actually had to stop and decide if I'd imagined it. I delivered a complimentary dessert, Waverly, with a Riesling pairing. You know what you did." She met his eyes. He needed to hear it from someone who wasn't you, because when it comes from you, it looks like bitterness, even when it isn't. But when it comes from someone who had nothing at stake, it just looked like the truth, Camden said. That's what it was. The silence between them was the good kind. The kind that had weight but not pressure. "Why did you do it?" he said. "You'd only spoken to me for about 15 minutes at that point." Waverly thought about the honest answer. The honest answer was that she'd seen something in his face when Iris Calloway had made the announcement. Something he'd pulled back into control very quickly, but not quite fast enough, and she'd felt it land somewhere in her own chest like a tuning fork. She gave him a slightly simpler version of that. "I recognize the look of someone being made to feel like they don't belong somewhere they've earned 10 times over," she said. "I've had that look myself. I don't like it on other people." Camden set down his cup. He leaned forward, both arms on the table, and looked at her with the focused attention she had come to understand was his version of being completely present. "What was the name of the restaurant?" he said. "The hotel position you lost," she told him. "The executive chef there now," he said. "Trained under someone I know. The food is technically sound and entirely forgettable." He paused. "You make food people remember while eating. That's rarer." Waverly felt something she didn't have an immediate name for. It sat between gratitude and something more complicated, and she let it be both. "You're going to be insufferable when this restaurant opens," she said. "I can already tell, very probably. I'm going to need you to not be like that during negotiations. I'll do my best. Your best will not be good enough, and you know it." He laughed. And then, in the particular way that some moments decide their own timing, he reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Neither of them said anything. Outside, a delivery truck was parking on the street. Simone's flowers were sitting in their pots along the windowsill, entirely unbothered. Waverly looked at his hand, then at him. "Still no lettuce," she said. He blinked. "What?" "Nothing, just." She turned her hand under his. "A thing I thought of." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that said he was filing this away for later, which she found she didn't mind at all. The restaurant opened on a Thursday in October, which was technically not one of their Thursdays but felt like it should have been. Waverly was there from 6 in the morning because she had a catering setup that required 6 in the morning, and also because she had stopped pretending she wasn't exactly where she wanted to be. The opening night was quiet by design. 50 covers. A room full of people Camden had chosen carefully. People who actually loved food, not people who photographed it. A few journalists, but only the ones who would understand what the place was doing. Simone's flowers were on every table. The music was the kind that existed at the edge of noticing. The brick wall had 3 small framed photos on it, all of them of different people's hands doing different things in different kitchens, and no captions. Waverly was at the pass when she heard the door. Gerald Dunmore walked in. She recognized him immediately. The tan, the posture, the same ease as a man who assumed he was expected. He hadn't been invited. That much was obvious from the way Petra, the front-of-house manager, looked at her tablet and then looked at him with careful neutrality. "I don't see a reservation," Petra said pleasantly. "I'm a colleague of Camden's," Dunmore said. "A friend, actually. We go back a long way. I thought I'd stop by and offer my congratulations." Waverly looked through the pass. Camden was in the kitchen. He was in his element in the way that was different from any other version of him she'd seen. Faster, quieter, entirely certain. He hadn't seen the door. Waverly came out of the kitchen. She crossed the dining room to where Petra was standing with patience she was visibly rationing. "Mr. Dunmore," Waverly said. He looked at her. No recognition. Why would there be? She was the catering person from the gala. People like Gerald Dunmore didn't maintain files on catering people. "I'm Waverly Sinclair, the catering partner here." She smiled. "I'm afraid we're fully reserved this evening. It's a private event." "I understand that, but if you could just let Camden know I'm here. Chef Ashworth is in service right now and won't be available until close." Her voice was the same pleasant, neutral service industry register she'd used at the gala. No aggression. Just an immovable wall that sounded like a cushion. "We'd love to have you come back another time. Petra can help you with a reservation." Dunmore looked at her. Something shifted in his face, not embarrassment exactly, something adjacent to it. "Of course," he said. "Of course, that's fine." Petra was already at the reservation book. Waverly waited until he was seated at a table near the door, looking at a menu with the slightly too interested expression of a person recalibrating, before she went back to the kitchen. Camden looked up when she came in. "Everything all right?" "Perfectly," she said. "Someone wanted to congratulate you at the wrong moment. I said you'd be available after service." Camden looked at her. A pause of about 2 seconds. "Who?" she told him. The pause this time was longer. He looked at the pass, at the plates going out, at the dining room beyond them. "I thought about this," he said. "Many times. What I'd say if I saw him again." "You don't have to say anything," Waverly said. "He's having a very good meal at your restaurant. Surrounded by people who are here because you built something worth being in. You don't owe him a single word." Camden was quiet. "Though," she added, "if you did want to go out and say hello at the end of service, I might accidentally mention in his earshot that the espresso machine has just been calibrated to your exact specification." Camden looked at her. "Because people who appreciate things tend to appreciate specificity," she continued. "And people who dismissed you at 22 might benefit from understanding exactly how specific you've become." The corner of his mouth moved. "You're very precise," he said. "I'm a caterer. Precision is the whole job." He shook his head, but he was almost smiling, and she could see him standing up straighter in a way that was not about posture. After service, Camden went out to the dining room. Waverly stayed at the pass, watching through the window. She saw him stop at Dunmore's table. She couldn't hear what was said. She could only see Camden standing, unhurried, saying something brief. Dunmore's expression shifting through several registers, arriving somewhere that looked like he was doing long arithmetic and arriving at a sum he didn't like. Then Camden shook his hand, courteous, clean, the handshake of a person who had nothing left to prove and knew it. He came back to the kitchen. "Well," Waverly said. "I thanked him," Camden said. She blinked. "You thanked him?" "I told him that losing the scholarship was the worst thing that happened to me at 22 and the best thing that happened to me at 23. Because it made me build something that was completely mine." He paused. "Then I thanked him for showing up tonight. I told him I hoped the meal was worth it." Waverly was quiet for a moment. "That," she said, "was better than anything I would have done." "I had 2 months to think about it," he said. And then, with the quietness that was the truest version of him, "I also had someone who reminded me that I don't have to be 22 in that room anymore." The kitchen staff were beginning the close down, the sounds of an evening settling into itself. Outside, through the small window above the prep station, the street was dark and lit and ordinary. Camden took off his jacket and hung it on the back of the door. "Waverly, I know," she said. "Don't say it like that." "Like what?" "Like you're about to be formal about it. Just say whatever you're going to say." He looked at her. Then he crossed the kitchen, which wasn't large, and stood in front of her and said, "Stay for a while after everyone leaves. I want to cook something just for you." She looked at him. "Something where you have complete creative control over the ingredients?" "Yes. And if there's spinach in it?" "I'll warn you first." "Then yes," Waverly said. "I'll stay." The last of the kitchen staff cleared out by 11:30. The restaurant was quiet in the way that rooms feel after they've held people and let them go. Full of something invisible, satisfied. Camden cooked, not a dish from any menu, not anything calibrated for a critic or a photograph. Something he'd made in a version of this kitchen in his head for years. Fresh pasta, a brown butter with sage and a little preserved lemon. The simplest, honest food in the world done with the kind of care that can only come from someone who has never stopped thinking about it. They ate at the table nearest the window, the one with Simone's flowers still sitting in their pot, a little past their best now, which made them look more real. "This," Waverly said about the pasta, "is unfair." "Why unfair?" "Because now I have to recalibrate my entire opinion of what pasta is. That seems like a reasonable outcome." She looked at him across the table. The quiet man from the service corridor, who had known about a broken hinge, who had said "I'm here for the event" and meant it in a way she hadn't fully understood until later, who had shaken the hand of the man who had taken something from him and said thank you without bitterness, just truth. "Camden," she said. "Yes, nothing. I was just going to say your name." He tilted his head. "Why?" "To see what it felt like." A pause. "Comfortable," she decided. "It feels comfortable." He reached across the table in the way he had at the Thursday table, unhurried, certain. "Good," he said. Outside, the Ottawa night was doing what October nights did, cold and clear and going on without them entirely. Inside, the flowers were slightly past perfect. The pasta was finished. The kitchen light was still on. And Waverly Sinclair, who had once cried in a Tim Hortons parking lot over a job that was never right for her anyway, sat across from a man who had cooked her for the best thing she'd ever eaten in a room he'd built out of everything someone had once tried to take from, and thought, yes, this is where I'm supposed to be. She didn't say it out loud. She didn't need to. Some things don't need an audience. They just need to be true, and this one was.